Hi, and welcome to What a Word with KBDB, with your host, Tumi. The whole heart behind this podcast is to encourage us in our seasons of trials and challenges with the Word of God, knowing that regardless of what we're going through, He is faithful and His Word doesn't change. The situations may be different, but He is always faithful. So without much ado, let's get straight into it. Okay, so welcome to the 6th episode of What a Word with KBDB. I am your host, Tumi, and today we have a very interesting guest, and we're going to have a great conversation with him. But I don't want to introduce him. I'm going to allow him to introduce himself. So will you please tell us who you are, what do you do, and if you are social, how can we find you?
Hi everyone. Hi Tumi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
My,
being here.
my name is Hassan. I'm an academy coach at Chelsea Football Club. You can find me on Instagram at More Than a Coach.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So today, or this week's episode, we're going to be talking with Hassan, and we're going to talk with him, and he's going to share his perspective on things about transitioning from a single man to a husband, from a husband and being now a father, and what is the male kind of perspective, and also the Christian male perspective going through that. And I hope and pray that for all of our listeners, we'll be able to learn about what it's like for the Christian man's point of view, and maybe how we can better engage with our men and with families as well. So thanks for being here, Hassan. So first of all, I just wanted to hear your story from your perspective on what it was like for you transitioning from a single man, a bachelor, to being a husband. What was that transition like for you?
The transitional period, if I go back a step, I would say I went through a preparation stage first before I got to the transitional period. In terms of preparation, read books, listened to sermons, spoke to my mentors, spoke to other married folk. And I guess for me, it was trying to grasp the idea and the concept behind marriage. Of course, naturally, being a Christian, we're encouraged to get married and all the rest of it. But for me, it was understanding what it entailed and making sure I was ready for what I was signing up to. So, in the lead up to meeting my missus, I did go through a stage where, like I just said, I was learning, developing myself, just so that I was prepared for every potential outcome. And when I met my missus and, cut a long story short, got married, it was a beautiful period because I believe that I was ready. And I thank God for that period that I went through because, in a sense, it prepared me for all the things that people told me to expect and all the things that they didn't tell me to expect, which is probably stuff that I'll touch on, all the things that people don't actually tell you about marriage. And of course, when you have children as well, how the dynamic of relationship changes and your life changes and you're trying to find that, work-life balance and trying to be a husband and all the rest of it. So, hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Hassan. You mentioned about preparation, and you spoke about you've read books. Are there any particular books that stood out to you particular that really helped shape your mindset for the next season that you're going into?
I think the most powerful book that I read amongst a few was a book by Voda Boatram. He's got a few sermons on marriage as well. And his book was what's the title again? What He Must Be If He Wants to Marry My Daughter.
Okay.
And reading that book was a revolution for me. And of course, listening to his sermons as well. And again, as well as listening to a few others. But that by far is the one that sticks out the most.
That is, thank you. I'll put it on the link or on the box below so people can search for it if they're interested. It's quite interesting. As a woman, as a Christian woman, I find that when it comes to personal development, that Christian women are really big on it. And when it comes to personal development or business development, that men are really interested in it. Not saying that women are not, but if you look at Christian seminars or conferences, the topics that are put in there, they seem to vary a lot. So I find it quite interesting that as a man that what sparked your interest, or what made you realize that you needed to grow in this area before you got married? So I don't think that's something that, I don't know if that's something that men openly say, I'm reading how to be a better husband, before they actually are a husband, or before they're even seeing anyone.
Well, I'd like to say that experience can only give you so much, and when I mean experience, it's great to learn off your own experiences and going through challenges and that kind of stuff. But I think ultimately, if the information's already out there, and of course there are a number of variables, but if the information's out there, then I'd rather ensure that I am as best prepared as possible. And I'm not saying I am, the person I am today, and I will be in the future based on the books I've read and the sermons I've listened to, but undoubtedly it's going to help me when I'm in challenging situations, and even when I'm in a good situation. It's always good to reflect on some of the articles or books, etc., that I've read, and that's helped to shape me. And for me, developing myself has always been central to myself as a person. Primarily because consistency is everything. And with consistency, I guess what often dictates consistency is circumstances. And when circumstances begin to change and not go the way that you would like them to go, naturally you begin to lose consistency. So your integrity fades, and the plans that you had perhaps don't go in a direction you would have them go because of your emotions and all the rest of it, and all the other external factors. So for me, my personal development has always been essential to the person that I am. I'm always seeking to learn. I'm always seeking to be open-minded, receptive to new ways of doing things. But ultimately, as a man, I know that I have to make my own choices and I have to live with them.
Yeah. No, thanks, Hassan. That's really good. That's really good, actually. And so moving on from that, so you've gotten to this position where you're self-developing, you've opened yourself up to mentors. Can I just quickly ask, what would you say to guys who maybe find it hard to open up to other men about where they are, or maybe even for female listeners who are trying to get the men in their lives, regardless of relationship, to get them a mentor? What would you say about how, or what are the pros of doing that?
The pros of doing it is that you can be honest and you can be open to someone who won't necessarily judge you. Well, you would hope the person doesn't judge you. So of course you have to find someone with a non-judgmental spirit, but someone who genuinely wants to help. Someone you can be totally transparent with. And for me, I really wanted a mentor. And most guys, and I'll speak about myself, I won't generalize, but I'm naturally a private person. I don't really like sharing my feelings, my emotions. I tend not to show my feelings and emotions very much, like most men, no different to any other man. And we almost carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. And if we're suffering, we'll never ask for help, or we tend not to ask for help until the very last minute. So for me, getting a mentor was me accepting, you know what, Hass, you can't do this by yourself in terms of running the race of life. You can't do this by yourself. You need to learn. You need to be able to be open with someone. And if you're struggling with something, it's not always necessary that the person can find a solution for you, but it may just be you need to vent. Because I can't vent to my mum, or I didn't want to. Didn't want to vent to my dad. Didn't want to vent to necessarily my siblings. Not that I can't. I can. But I'm an oldest child as well, so there's only so much that I can say to my younger siblings. I needed someone that I could go to that is older, who is wiser, who can support in a different light, but also who can give me a bit of criticism. So if I'm making mistakes and I'm making the wrong decisions and take the wrong decisions and taking the wrong turnings, I needed someone who can be honest and say, no, you messed up. You can't do that. You need to be this way inclined, and you need to do that, and you need to fix it this way, and you're too proud or you're too arrogant, whatever it may be. So I needed that little bit of realism that I could get from my boys, but ultimately I needed something a little bit different, a different perspective.
I think that's a valid point about having that different perspective. And I guess as much as we want to encourage people to have mentors and to be accountable to people, I'm beginning to understand, I think it's more of a, like, no one can reach that point for you. You have to almost reach that conclusion yourself. As much as we want to encourage people to do so, and oh my gosh, you need to, but until that person realizes that they can't do it all by themselves, that they need someone to help them, they're not going to really be able to do that. So please, listeners, if you don't have a mentor, seek one out, pray for one.
If you're ready for one.
If you're ready for one. But yeah, people's perspective, the other perspective is necessary. Brilliant. So talking about then having a different perspective, when you got into your serious relationship with your now wife, how did all of those things that you did in preparation, how did that help you? How did it help you make a decision that she was your wife, and how did it prepare you for then being a husband?
How did it prepare me? I think meeting my wife was probably one of the, I won't say crazy, but it was a bit bizarre in the sense that I didn't expect it. So I mean, meeting her, I was introduced to her by one of my cousins. And then when we met, he told me to give her a call. I didn't call her for a couple of weeks. Ended up calling her. We went out on what you would call a date.
Sorry, why didn't you call her? A couple of weeks.
I gave it a couple of weeks. And that was because I wasn't initially interested. Not in a way that I wasn't interested in her, but I'd gone through some experiences with one or two other girls, and I just thought, you know what, I can't be bothered anymore. This is pointless. So I kind of just wanted to just keep myself to myself. And then when I was introduced to her, she was a lovely girl, but I just didn't have the energy. I just didn't want to do it. So I gave myself a couple of weeks. Then I ended up reaching out. She said hi and whatnot. We spoke for a little bit. Conversation was really good, really fluent. And then I just started to speak to her about her faith and what she believed, and things like you wouldn't necessarily speak about, like the Trinity and salvation and all these questions I started to ask her that I had never done before in a relationship. In getting to know someone. And as we began to dig a little bit deeper and dive deeper into the conversation and answer the questions and follow questions with questions, I just found this girl's quite deep. I can relate. Plus, we genuinely had a bit of a rapport anyway.
Yeah.
So, quite long story short, went on a date. Date again was a bit spontaneous. Called her, said, what you doing? Do you want to go out? She was like, now. I was like, well, in a couple of hours. She said yes. Decided to go to the cinema, and I did something that I wouldn't necessarily do. So I bought tickets online. And not many people buy tickets online. I certainly didn't. I bought tickets in advance, and I couldn't believe I did. And it just so happened that when we got to the cinema, the tickets were actually sold out. So it was actually a good thing that I bought tickets online. I also offered to pick her up. She didn't want me to pick her up. She wanted to meet me there. And I thought, okay, why wouldn't you want me to pick you up? But it was a nice touch. Again, it was an experience that I had never had before. If I'd gone on dates in the past, I'd always picked up the girl. It was just, a gentleman thing to do, but she didn't want me to. Anyway, at the end of the night, watch the movie. You can't talk much in the movie,
No.
But you can assess body language. I can look at her in a certain way. She'll look at me in a certain way, gestures, all the rest of it. So night went really smoothly. When the movie finished, we stood in the car park, had a conversation for about 10 minutes, and then we both went our separate ways. And I got back into the car and I thought, that was strange, but that was good. In the sense that we didn't talk very much. We came out, and usually it would be, oh, come and sit in my car, or let's drive somewhere, or let's go for a drink. We didn't do that. We literally spent for 10 minutes, went our separate ways. And I guess to go back to your initial question, or what your question sounds like, or it sounds like in my head, if I can remember it, how did it help me? So all of my preparation, how did it support me in meeting my wife? I would say that it helped me to be very patient in my approach. It helped me to see a different perspective in terms of the way that we constructed our conversations.
Okay.
As you know, when you're having conversations with someone that you've just met, it's often centered around, what do you do for a living, and what's your family like, or when was your last relationship, or have you slept with someone, or how many times have you slept with someone, and when was the last time, all those cringy little questions that you don't really want to answer. Like, why is she asking me stupid questions, or why is he asking me stupid questions? So it changed my approach and altered my mindset, I would say. And in the end, I guess the rest is history, and we ended up coming together and getting married, and quite quickly, if I may add.
Yeah.
I, I knew she was the one for me after about 4 months of seeing her.
So 4 months. So for obviously, like how long have you been married? 5 years? 4 years?
Yeah, October 2014.
14. Okay, so that's 6 years.
This is
6 years.
coming to
It's coming
this
to
is
six
yeah,
years. Wow, time
yeah.
flies. So you were like in your late-ish to mid-20s, like coming into your late-ish 20s, but like mid-20s
Mhm.
ish. So now, like, okay, so we're in our 30s, and 4 months, that's
Mhm.
like a quarter of a year. Some
Mhm.
people say that's like a long time at this stage to be talking to someone, and for 4 months to maybe say, oh, okay, I think we're just friends. Can you give any
Mhm.
help to some of our female listeners, maybe what to look out for? Obviously, you can't speak for all men, but maybe what to look out for if a guy maybe isn't serious and they're just kind of talking to be talking, and they don't maybe have long-term goals for you.
Oh, you're trying to make me bring down the man them.
I'm just trying to say that you said you knew in the 4 months, and I'm wondering, did you knew? I feel like you knew maybe before the fourth month. So just to help some of us out who are trying to move from one season to another, what
Yeah,
could
yeah.
we maybe look out for from a man's perspective that may
Mhm.
indicate, obviously every situation is different, but what may
Yeah.
indicate that maybe Mr. Man is not thinking so much long term right now?
Mhm. Um, the first one I would say is consistency.
Okay.
I think when a guy genuinely likes you, he is consistent with his methods of communication. He's consistent with his methods of action. The other one would be honesty
Mm.
and transparency. Nothing to hide. That was my approach. I'm just
Yeah,
speaking from my
yeah,
own
no, that's good.
experience, by the way. So nothing to hide. I'm not dating any other girl, so my phone's on the table. I'm not hiding anything from you.
Mm.
I'm not saying I would give, a girl that I'm seeing my password, but I'm certainly not hiding
Yeah.
anything. Any questions she may ask, again, I'm open to answering those questions, and with an honest approach, and again, being consistent in my thoughts and in my actions, in my methods of communication. And if there was a last one, I would say it's in his ability to help you. So with my wife, one of the first things I did was to buy her a book.
Okay.
And she was like, "A book?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, you need to learn, you need to grow." I started I started to, recognize in our conversation, I started to recognize areas of personal growth that she needed.
Mm.
And for me, it was as the man in the relationship, knowing that this is a girl that I may potentially pursue and marry. I wanted to help her with those areas that she struggled with. I wanted to support her with, areas of development.
Oh.
And it's not about it. What for me, it wasn't trying to give her money or buy her a nice bag. It was trying to, help her with something that could support her long-term development.
Mm.
And,
That's good.
not some sort of a short-term gain.
Yeah.
So the third one will probably be how he invests in you.
Mm.
Um, and these things are vice
Yeah.
versa. This is not just the man towards the woman. This is also the woman towards the man, because it should be reciprocated, right?
Yeah. It should be. That's really good, Has. Thank you. Thank you for that. Really helping us all out here. Okay, so we've talked about marriage, we've talked about singlehood, we've talked about marriage, and then you're a father. You've got a little girl
Mm.
right now. Um,
Hmm.
did you have, or what? How was it then different from now being married, no children, and now being a husband? Like, what did that, being a father, sorry, what did that transition do to you as a man and as a Christian man?
I love talking about this because this is what you don't speak about at marriage counseling, and this is what people don't tell you about. Now, this period in your relationship, for a lot of guys that I've spoken to anyway, it is quite
Mm,
challenging. So specifically for me, it's challenging because you have to manage your expectations.
okay.
Now, although that may be a duh moment, like, yeah, obviously you have to because you've got a child in the mix and there's now three of you when there used to be two. But things change.
Yeah.
You know, you're not. I've said this to someone before. You're not having sex as
Mm-hmm.
much. So where you would be able to come home and it's on tap and she's there and you're like, yeah, come on. It doesn't work that way. You've got a
Yeah.
baby at home.
Yeah.
Her body
Yeah.
changes, and when her body changes, it may not tickle your fancy the way it used to tickle your fancy.
Mm.
Her looks change slightly. Again, it may not float your boat the way it used to. She's not cooking as much for you. Communication is not as much. And for us, I mean, I'll be honest with my wife and I, we had a miscarriage before our first
Mm.
child. So we had a miscarriage at 5.5 months. So we virtually gave birth to a baby, and baby didn't survive.
Yeah.
So naturally, for my wife, she was very connected to our daughter Maya. So she didn't want to let her go. Now, for me, there were times when I felt like I was battling for my wife. I was battling for her time. I was
Yeah.
battling for her space.
Yeah.
The baby would sleep in our room, then the baby came into our bed, and I'm like, come on, man, this is too much for me now.
Yeah.
Like, is it me or is it her? Of
Mm.
course, I never gave her that ultimatum, but there were often times when I felt that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, it changed the dynamic. And we had a couple of, really powerful conversations. I guess this is the beauty of communication, being honest, being transparent. And I basically said, you're not giving me enough time. But then she also said a little bit similar because I work quite a fair bit. I work 6 days a week. So, she said the same in terms of the time that she needed from me and the support she needed. And that's not to say we had a terrible relationship, but we were comfortable enough in our relationship and in ourselves to have an honest conversation about where we are and what our
Yeah. That's
expectations
good.
were. So that was a beautiful point, I guess, in the period of transitioning from being, a married couple to being a married couple with a child.
Yeah.
That was an awesome phase for
Wow.
us, and one of real growth.
That's really awesome. Hassan, you spoke about the miscarriage, and as a woman, I know friends who have gone through it, but as a man and as a husband, like wanting to protect and kind of be that man for your family and for your wife, how did that impact you?
Men deal with things
Yeah.
differently, of course. We process things differently. We know that if the woman's crying, or not all men, but for me it was, I can't be crying right next to her.
Mm.
I need to be the one that she, you know, leans her head on his shoulder, and she can feel strong and she can take a little bit of encouragement from
Yeah.
me. And when we had our miscarriage, I knew I had to be that person. But one thing with me is my faith greatly helps
Mm.
in that it allowed me to be unshakable. And I think I did shed a tear
Mm-hmm.
at some point in my private time.
Mm.
I don't even know if my missus knows that, but I did shed a tear in my private time. But that was almost a release. I just needed a release from
Yeah.
trying to shoulder the burden and make sure my wife was okay and make sure the home was fine and a conducive
Mm.
environment. And you have that miscarriage, and then there's fear that starts to creep
Yeah, of
in, and
course.
you're looking at month after month, you're checking your
Yeah.
period, has it come, oh my god, I'm not getting pregnant, what's going on, all of that stuff, all the emotional baggage. And I wasn't processing it myself because I was too busy trying to support my wife. And then you've got family and
Mm.
friends who, some are saying, the devil done this and the devil that. I'm like, yo, come on, don't come here
Mm.
with all that negativity. We don't need that vibe. We don't need that sort of energy
Mm.
here. So you're dealing with all of that. And I guess for me it was going back to my mentor, someone who I could be open and honest with, transparent
Yeah.
with, making sure that I could relate to my boy, so seeking the wise
Mm.
counsel, but then being honest with myself in terms of where I was and making sure that I sought the help. Otherwise, you start to creep into what we fondly know today as mental
Yeah.
health, which
Yeah.
everyone talks about. So it was trying to deal with the process of making sure that I was in a good, healthy, and stable place to support my
That's
wife.
really beautiful. That's really amazing because as a single woman, like we hear a lot, you've got to work on your relationship with Christ before you can't expect your husband to completely, or your husband to like be a substitute for your relationship with Christ. And I think hearing you speak, I really just kind of got like an insight of why it's so important for both parties in the relationship and then into marriage have an independent relationship with God.
Big time. And you know what? That is another topic in itself, in that in marriage, my relationship with God is not the same as my wife's relationship with God. And that took me a little bit of time to understand. So, example, and I know we don't really want to dig into this, but I'll just share. When we would pray in the morning, there were a few times early on where my wife would be laying down and praying, and I'd be standing up and, firing from wall to wall around the whole home. And I'd be like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so lazy? Like, get up, pray. Now I'm trying to measure her relationship with my relationship, because I'm standing up and walking around and, firing and hellstoning, and she's laying down. I almost looked at her as a lazy Christian. And I had to understand that our relationships with God are very different. And if that's the way that she communicates, and that's the way that she feels comfortable, who am I to tell her she needs to be doing what I'm doing? And that again is a dynamic in the relationship that you have to understand. And again, I've said to someone before that we also went to different churches. So she likes the way that her pastor did things, and I like the way my pastor did things. But I've always been very much, it's about God and it's about the Bible. What church we go to, I'm indifferent. As long as they're preaching the gospel and we align the same beliefs, I'm good. So again, with church, it took her a bit of time to get round to, really liking and engaging with the church that I go to. Not that she detested it. It's just that she was just used to a certain method of worship. Yeah. So it took her some time, and in the end, we came around and we started to enjoy the church that we go to at the moment, which is my original church.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you. And that actually really leads into our final question. And when you're speaking about the hard time with the miscarriage, you were speaking about like your faith, and even talking about being a man in terms of being strong and being that pillar. So I wanted to ask you, what myths would you want to debunk about Christian masculinity in the home? What does that look like? What does a Christian leader look like in the home from your perspective?
Well, I lead the prayers in the morning and the evening. I often initiate the Bible study or any reading of scripture. Not that my missus doesn't, but I'm often the one to do so. And that's fine. It's just the roles that we play. There's nothing wrong with it. And if it works the other way, then I think it's okay. And I always say it's whatever works for your relationship. I mean, I'm also the type of person that I cook, I clean, and not to say that I'm always doing those things and my wife doesn't. It's just I don't have a problem with it. I come from a home where my mum encouraged me to clean, encouraged all of us to clean. She encouraged us to cook because she's a chef. So naturally, I would help her when she was making dishes. So in the early stages of marriage, when my missus was at work till late, I would often cook, and she'd be like, "Wow, you cooked?" I said, "Yeah, I can cook." She came home one day and I made jollof rice. She was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah." "What? You think I can't cook?" So although she knew, because I told her I could cook, but seeing it was something different. So, I think it's whatever works in your relationship. I know if it works that, the husband does the trash and the woman does the dishes, or, the husband does the cleaning and the woman does the sheets, the bed sheets, whatever it is. I think the dynamic of your relationship is up to you, and we can't allow our culture and tradition to almost manipulate and affect our relationship to the degree that we start to argue and quarrel. There's times when people have come over to mine and they're like, "Why are you doing the dishes? Like, shouldn't your missus be doing the dishes?" I'm like, "Well, why should she be doing the dishes?" Oh, like, and you know what they want to say, the way they're thinking. But for me, it's not a problem. I don't mind doing the dishes, and she'll also do the dishes. She'll cook, and if she does the cooking, I'll often do the dishes, because we have to make sure we balance it up. So the dynamic of your relationship is totally up to you. That's something that I would strongly say and advise.
That's really great. And I think as well, like, your child now, Maya, like, she's a girl, and I think it is really important that as the firstborn and as a daughter, that she sees gender roles being what mum and dad say, and not that I'm the girl and so I have to do this. And mummy's mum, so she does this, and daddy's a boy, so he just sits there and doesn't have to do anything, because that's what. So you're actually practicing those healthy kind of role models for her, and she'll actually see that.
And I think that's really powerful, because Amaya knows that, sometimes I do bath time quite often. I'll take her into the shower, or maybe she wants to have a bubble bath, or, before a good one is in the mornings. My wife often leaves for work before me. So, I'll get Amaya ready in the morning. I'll make sure that her hair is done. I'll make sure, she's dressed appropriately. I iron her clothes. Yeah, I sometimes do her hair in the morning. Nothing flamboyant, but I ensure that I can pack it. I ensure that I put the right products in. I brush her hair, and I have to make sure that she looks presentable, when she arrives. And I always say as well that if you ensure that your child is presentable at school, at nursery, whatever it may be, I also believe that people will treat her that way. If she looks good, she'll be treated good. If she looks scruffy, I think people will be a little bit so-so with the child. And that's the type of world
we live in, unfortunately. It shouldn't be that way.
We're very judgmental,
and we have to be honest with that. No, that's really valid. Thank you so much, Hassan. I've got one last question, and this is just some practical tips that you would give to our male listeners and even to our female listeners, that what can they do to kind of let their men be the leaders in the home, and what have you found has helped you kind of strengthen your leadership skills or strengthen your faith in the home, or as a man, actually? What have you done for yourself that has strengthened your faith?
Sorry, I'm going to ask you to repeat the question.
So the question was, what useful tips can you share that has helped you increase your faith as a husband and father and running the home, that could be useful for our male and female listeners, actually?
I would say my driving force, firstly, is to make sure that I provide for my family. And much like any man, but that's always been big on my priority list when I was a bachelor, as you called it. Because I just want to ensure that I'm able to pay the bills, pay for my daughter's nursery, look after my wife. And I almost want to be that man that maybe the old traditional man that wants to pay for everything, and whatever she earns, it's up to her what she does with her money. I've always been that way inclined. In terms of tips of my leadership growth, is ensuring that I have a group of guys who are what I'd call my wise counsel. So guys that I could run to, be honest, be open with. Ensuring that I have mentors around me. So one or two, older men that I could go and seek advice. Men with similar mindset. I've always wanted a mentor that has children, that is working, that is a Christian, and that has good core values that are similar to mine. Someone who can be honest with me. So in terms of tips, I'd probably say maybe that's about it. I can't think of any more tips.
I just wanted to ask. Last question, I promise. So good. I just want to ask, like, in terms of, talked about like friends and having mentors who are kind of like you, but also may have different perspectives and things that you don't think about. Do you think it makes that much of a big deal if, like, you had some of your friends who did not have the same mindset as you, that maybe didn't think adultery was a big deal, or didn't really think that providing for their family was a big deal? Because you have some people that say, I am me and those are my friends. But do you think that obviously as a family man and having your core values, do you think that can work? Or do you think it's what do you think?
I think it can work, because not all my friends, I don't have the same mindset as all my friends, and vice versa. I've got friends who don't even believe in God, and who think it's all made up and it's a load of trash. And we can have conversations upon conversations, and I'm trying to convince them, and they will still disagree. I've got guys who, think that you can have more than one missus, and we can keep going around in circles. But I always say, and this is what I learned probably about 15 years ago, when it comes to friendships and relationships with your peers, you have to have people that you
Yeah.
pour into, and you have to have people who
Wow.
pour into you. So having those relationships is not a problem, but you've got to ensure that there's others that are pouring, positivity into you, or maybe sharing the same ideologies and messages, same faith. You've got to have like-minded people around you.
Yeah.
And then those who aren't necessarily like-minded, I'm sure they're your friends because you have other interests that join you together. So it's making sure that you're pouring into others and others are pouring into you.
That's brilliant. That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Hassan. Will you
You're
just
very
say
welcome.
again where we can find you on Instagram just one more time?
Yeah, of course. You can find me at More Than a Coach on Instagram.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We're so grateful to have your wise perspective and your views and thoughts. And as we will go into the next section where you will read your scriptures that have encouraged you on the journey that you're currently on. Thank you so much, Has.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me. And hopefully I've helped or inspired someone.
Absolutely. I'm
Hopefully.
By His grace, you definitely have. You've inspired me, so you definitely have. Thank you.
Thank you very
hold
much.
on for the scriptures coming up next. Bye.
I'm going to share 5 scriptures with you. I'll start off with Lost Son. It's quite a lengthy one. But I'll read a few scriptures. And I picked this one particularly because it represents a father who built himself up and built his family up to the point where his child was able to leave with an inheritance. And although the child squandered the inheritance, the child was able to come back. He ran into his father's arms, who was still loving, who was still caring, and who was still able to give him, I would like to assume, even more inheritance. So Luke 15:11-24. Then he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possession with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him, had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out our best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Second scripture I will read, and it falls in line with this, is Proverbs 13:22, and pretty much what I just read out in the previous scripture. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. So probably more the first part of that scripture. Going to Ephesians 5:23. For the husband is the head of his wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and he is the saviour of the body. 1 Timothy 5:8. 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. The last one I will read is Proverbs 22:6. It says, train up a child in a way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Thank you. Amen.